Rachel? Well, hello and welcome everybody to this session, this most exciting session of the Khushwan Singh Literary Festival London. And I have the one and only Dr.JANE Goodall joining us for this session. And Dr. Goodall, just give me a moment to gush a little bit, please, because as a young girl, I've read all about you, your incredible story of, the adventure, the fact that you are this trailblazer, you've been an inspiration to so many people around the world and so many women around the world. And it's an absolute pleasure to be, speaking to you now about this book that you've just written. And I think the Book of Hope is something we all need right now. There's no better time for it, especially given the last 2 years that the world has been through. So if you could first tell us a little bit about this book.
Well, the book was written because I really feel that people around the world desperately need hope. And the big problem is if people read all the bad news, and there's a lot of bad news, let's not, pretend there isn't. But if you just read the bad news, you feel helpless and hopeless. And then you think, well, there's nothing I can do as one person. So you do nothing. And that's the problem that we have to overcome. So trying to give a message that every single person makes some kind of impact every single day. And we can choose the kind of impact we make. And if you feel helpless and hopeless, find something that you care about, probably in your own community, and think, well, I could do something about that. Maybe it's picking up litter, maybe it's growing organic vegetables, maybe it's planting trees, whatever it is. Get together with your friends and take action. And the more you take action, the more action you take. And then when you realize that all around the world, other people are taking action, suddenly you begin to realize, yes, there is a point to taking action. And so the hope leads you to more action, and more action leads to inspiring others. And I do think right now we desperately need hope.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting that you began this book before the pandemic, because, in the book and the accounts and the conversations that your co-author Douglas and you have, it was a pre-pandemic. And then, the pandemic began, you couldn't, meet anymore. You were doing a lot of talks on video, etc. And so this book traverses that whole period. And even before the pandemic began, as far as the fight for the environment, against climate change, this whole climate fight, we were at this sort of crucial point where it already seemed like time was running out, that if we didn't act now, it was just going to be too late. And then the pandemic struck. How do you feel this has changed the way we're thinking?
Well, I think, first of all, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, the pandemic pushed these other two really important threats to our future, with climate change and loss of biodiversity. Those got sidelined for a while. But now people are beginning to realize that it was exactly the same disrespect of nature and disrespect of animals that not only led to the pandemic, but also to these other climate crisis and loss of biodiversity. And so I think more people are understanding that we've brought these things on ourselves, and more people are feeling, yeah, we do need to have a different relationship with the natural world. We depend on the natural world for clean air, for clean water, for food, for shelter, for everything. But what we depend on is healthy ecosystems. And a healthy ecosystem is made up of the interrelated sum of the animals and plants that comprise it. And when species start becoming extinct, you tear holes in this tapestry. And if you tear enough holes, the ecosystem will collapse. So it's really, really important that we get together and start thinking differently about how we relate to nature.
And in the book, you talk about the 4 great challenges that are facing us for our survival. If you could, tell us a bit about that.
Well, the great challenges I see, first of all, we must alleviate poverty. Because if you live in extreme poverty and you're out in, say, around a national park, you're going to destroy the last trees because you've got to survive. So you may destroy them to get some land to grow food on because your own land is overcrowded and infertile, or to make charcoal, or to hunt and sell animals, something like that. So that's one big problem, alleviating poverty. And a second problem is the unsustainable lifestyle of so many of us, of so much more than we need, and we waste so much food, clothing, electronics. We just buy and throw away, buy and throw away. And it was your Mahatma Gandhi who said that the planet can provide for human need, but not human greed. And then we cannot ignore the fact that our populations are growing and our populations of livestock are growing. And already in some places, we are taking nature's finite natural resources faster than nature can replenish them. And right now there's over 7 billion of us on the planet. And I forget how many millions and millions of livestock. But by 2050, it's estimated there'll be closer to 10 billion of us. So clearly we have to change the way we operate, else I don't know what will happen. And then the other thing which I feel is really important to tackle is corruption, because it's corruption and it's the cozy relationship between corporations and governments. And well, around the world in so many, many places, you say, well, if you have money, you can buy anything, including people.
Those are the 4 great challenges. And then you also talk about the 4 reasons why you are hopeful. In the book, you talk at length about it. You talk about a human intellect, resilience of nature, the power of young people, and the indomitable human spirit. So young people, tell us a bit about that. Are you very hopeful about the generations that are coming, the young people that you see around us? Because there's a lot of people say young people, their attention spans are short, that maybe we live in this world where everything happens very fast, and you've persevered so much in your life when you were a young woman, when you were there studying chimpanzees. So tell us about what gives you hope from young people.
Well, I think young people now understand the problems that we face, the environmental problems and the social problems. And they understand because you can't really not learn about it if you've got any kind of education, because it's in the newspapers, it's on the news, it's everywhere all around you, all these threats to our future. And they seem somehow to be rising to the challenge. And I find that if young people understand the problem and you listen to them and you empower them to take action. So our program for young people works in groups of children in kindergarten, even preschool, up to university students and everything in between. And their main message, every one of us makes an impact every day and we get to choose. And every group tackles between them 3 different projects because everything is interrelated. I learned that in the rainforest. And so they choose a project that will help people, a project that will help animals, and a project that will help the environment. Then they talk about what bothers them. They discuss what can be done about it. And then they roll up their sleeves and they get out there and they take action. And they inspire me because, they're so passionate, so dedicated, and so optimistic, especially the younger children. But the university students too, they're the backbone of Roots and Shoots, actually. And that program is now in over 60 countries.
And the indomitable human spirit, that gives you hope as well.
Well, the indomitable human spirit, I mean, there are people you meet all over the place tackling what seems impossible, and they don't give up. And again, Mahatma Gandhi was one of those people, and Nelson Mandela was another, and Martin Luther King was another. And even if they don't succeed in righting the wrong that they're tackling in their lifetime, they've roused and inspired others who will carry on afterwards. And then there are people struggling with tremendous physical or social disabilities, and disabilities that would leave some people kind of sitting at home and giving up. And yet there they are, out with inspiring others. I mean, I know a Canadian, and he was born with no arms and no legs. He's got little stumps of arms. He's in this book, and he's got one thing like I suppose it's a remnant foot coming out of one where his thigh would be. And he goes around on a skateboard. He's so full of life and intelligence. I've met him 3 times now. And he's just amazing. And when I said to him, Chris, haven't they offered you some, artificial, some prosthetic arms and legs? And he said, yes, but, I think I was put together like this for a reason. So I think I'll stay as I am. And then with a twinkle in his eye, he said, but I suppose when I climb Mount Everest, I'll take them up on the artificial legs. That's
a wonderful story.
Having a sense of humor is so tremendously important.
And the resilience of nature?
The resilience of nature. You must have many, many places where a place that was totally destroyed, maybe an abandoned building site or an abandoned car park, nature comes back, the little plants creep up through the cement. But there are huge areas like where there was a quarry for, let's say, cement. And with clever management, copying nature, those places can be absolutely restored. Rivers that were polluted can be cleaned and life can come back. It's a tremendous reason for hope. There was a time where I studied the chimps in Gombe. At the beginning, it was part of a great forest belt that stretched right across equatorial Africa. And by the late 80s, I was horrified. I mean, I knew there was deforestation in the area, but I was not prepared to see an island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. And the people living there were too poor to buy food elsewhere. Their land was over-farmed and infertile. They were struggling to survive. They cut trees on even the steep slopes, causing terrible erosion and mudslides because they were desperate to feed their families. So that's when I realized, it hit me. If we don't help these people find ways of living without destroying their environment, we can't save chimps, forests, or anything else. And so JGI began a program around the Gombe National Park. We call it Take Care, or Takari. And it was a very holistic program. I won't go into it, but it ranged from scholarships to keep girls in school, microcredit opportunities for women, restoring fertility to the overused land without chemicals, and everything in between. And if you fly over Gombe today, there aren't any more bare hills. The trees have come back. The people have become our partners in conservation because they understand protecting the forest is not just about wildlife, but their own futures. And because of the microcredit, people have been able to start their own small environmentally sustainable businesses. So it's the best example I have.
In fact, I love the accounts that you, in your book, that you talk about, local communities, because this is something, we at NDTV, we've also emphasized throughout. We've done a lot of environment coverage, and we always emphasize on the communities living around the national parks. You have to take them along. It can't be a forest versus the community sort of a project or development project, and it has to involve them. And even when there's man-animal conflict, you have to listen to the side of the community as well, and take them along. Otherwise, you turn them away from conservation. But talking about hope, I'd like you to share with us in the book, you talk about the first months when you went to Bombay to study the chimpanzees, and how you lost hope in those first few weeks or months, because every time you went out, you used to wake up at the crack of dawn, go looking for them, and they just run away from you, and time was running out, money was running out, and you did lose hope somewhat during that time. So if you could just share that with us.
Well, I didn't lose hope in that I knew given time I could get of the chimps. The problem was their time. So it was not so much losing hope as a feeling of desperation. I must succeed, or else the whole project will end and I will have let my sponsor down. And of course, fortunately, towards the end of the 4th month, I saw the first chimpanzee to lose his fear of me, using and making tools. He was using grass stems to fish for termites, and he was picking leafy twigs and using them as tools. So he was using and making tools. And at that time, science believed that humans and only humans used and made tools. So that was it. And Leakey could then go to the National Geographic, and they said, yes, they would fund the research. When the 6 months money ran out, they sent a filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, to film the behavior as I got to know more and more of the chimps, and everything changed.
And what's so incredible is how you went there. You had not been to college, you had not studied, you hadn't done any masters or anything, but it was just sheer passion and love for animals. And you grew up on these stories of Dr. Dolittle and you Tarzan, and you really saw yourself there. And something has to be said for that as well, to be determined about something and just making it happen and not losing hope, isn't it?
Yes, well, you see, I was lucky. I was actually speaking to you from the house where I grew up, and the books behind me are some of the books I read as a child. And I was really lucky to have a fantastic mother, and she supported this love of animals. And when I decided age 10 that I would grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals and write books about them, everybody laughed at me. Ha ha, how would you do that? Dream about something you can achieve. Girls don't do that sort of thing. But Mum always said, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. If you don't give up, maybe you'll find a way. And so that was the encouragement I had from my mother. And I think it emphasizes the importance of parents supporting their children. We know from 60 years of observing the Gombe chimps, we're now in the beginning of the 5th generation. And we can look back over the data, and the chimps who had supportive mothers do better. The males reach a higher position in the hierarchy, probably sire more infants, and the females are better mothers. So it's the same for them and us. I mean, they resemble us in so many, many, many ways.
And your mother was extremely supportive. In fact, when you went to Gombe to study the chimpanzees, they wouldn't let you go because they said you can't send a single young woman into Africa like that. And then finally it was your mom who came along with you, isn't it?
Yes, she volunteered. I think Leakey twisted her arm. He wanted somebody with me who wouldn't compete, who would just be supportive. And he couldn't have picked anyone better, so right from the beginning, when I was really depressed in the early days, she'd kind of boost my morale and say, well, Jane, you found that peak and you've got your binoculars. You're learning more than you think. Learning how they make nests at night in the trees, bending the branches over, learning the kind of food they eat, learning the calls that they make, seeing the different kinds of groups they travel in, or they sometimes all meet up for a great feast and joy when a new food becomes available. So I actually was learning quite a lot, but it wasn't what I wanted to be learning. I wanted to get to know them as individuals and be able to be accepted by them.
Which you were eventually.
Which I eventually was. David Graybeard helped, definitely.
Yeah. Just wonderful, the stories about them and about how you gave them all names. And that's something so interesting because here in India as well, in our tiger parks, we call them T23, T32, the tigers. We're not supposed to name them, but everybody eventually does. And, and everybody, they talk about their characters, etc. around tiger parks. There's a lot of lore around that. Coming back to your book, however, in one of the conversations that you're having with Douglas, you said that the reason for hope is we can never accurately predict what the future might bring, and we don't know how it'll turn out. So if you could elaborate a bit on that.
Well, to take an extreme example, if you go back to one of the extinctions, the extinction of the dinosaurs, it's thought to be because a meteorite hit the planet and killed off all these big animals. Well, that could happen again, although they say maybe they could blow up a meteorite before it hit the Earth. But, we can't predict. If this pandemic had a higher death rate, I mean, it's very contagious. The cases have been in the hundreds and thousands and millions of actual people getting sick. But the percentage of deaths from the sick people was really relatively low. And if it had been like, say, for example, Ebola, which had a very, very high death rate, think what that would have done to our population. Be like the Black Death in the Middle Ages. So, there are all kinds of things out there that could happen. There could be a sudden something to cause massive infertility. There's all kinds of things that could happen.
Now, the theme for the festival this year, the Khushwan Singh Literature Festival, No Man is an Island. And I think this pandemic has really brought that home, isn't it? Because right now we're trying to get ahead of this disease. We're trying to vaccinate. You have the richer countries vaccinating, poor countries aren't vaccinated enough. And unless we help each other, we're not going to find a way out. So no man is an island in this. We're not all safe unless each and every one of us is safe.
Yeah, we need to get together. That's what I keep saying again and again and again. Alone, we can't do much. We can do what we can, and some people can do more than others. But it'll only make a real difference if we all get together. That's really the essence of the Roots and Shoots teaching. If enough people get together, you can truly make a difference. If enough young people say, we're going to clean up this stream, well, it happens. They even go as far as to go upstream to where the pollution is coming from, talk to the factory or whatever it was, try and get legislation in. That's an example from the US, by the way, which really happened.
Yes.
So, but it can happen anywhere.
Now, being from the media, I found it interesting when, you were talking to Doug and you spoke about the media and you said that, you felt the media focused too much on negative issues and negative stories and sensational stories, and you would have liked to focus more on positive stories. And that's something that we do try and do here. But yes, that's something that you felt was very important, that there are such stories of triumph, of hope, of human resilience that, can give all of us some sort of optimism and hope.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, that the media should share the hopeful stories. And actually on YouTube, there's so many, and there are wonderful stories about animals helping each other, people helping animals. I'm trying to collect some of them up. But then there's all the, through the pandemic, amazing stories of people helping those who couldn't leave the house, taking food to them, walking their dogs, whatever it is. And a disaster brings out either the best or the worst in people. So the worst would be that you go around stealing out of shops and things like that. The best is that you even risk your life to help others.
Well, we have a lot of people sending in questions for you, comments for you, a whole number of them praising you and, talking about how they're making their children watch right now. But one of the questions from Bharat Valani is, Dr. Goodall, what keeps you so active now? You're an example to the rest of the world. You have a punishing schedule, much like Khushwan Singh, who woke up every morning at 4 a.m. and that went on till he was 99.
Well, right now I'm not waking up at 4 a.m., although it was more like that till I got this book finished. But it is every day. It is Skypes and Zooms and interviews, and it's very hard giving a lecture when you're not in an auditorium. You don't get the feedback. you have to stare at that little camera spot on top of the laptop and get the same enthusiasm into it. But if you don't, there's no point giving the lecture. So I've had to learn to do that. And what keeps me going? Well, partly because I'm a very obstinate sort of person. I won't give in. I won't give in to the forces of evil. And there are forces of evil out there, quite honestly. Some of the big corporations who actually hide, they bury the fact that's been proven that their products will harm people or harm the environment. And they suppress that data. We've got leaked emails now proving it. But anyway, never mind that. So anyway, I'm obstinate. Also, I care passionately. I care about the environment. I'm devastated because half the bird species that were here when I was a child have gone. And we cannot let that go on happening. And mostly it was pesticides. And finally, I feel the great spiritual power. I feel it most when I'm out in nature, particularly in the forest. And sometimes just opening up to what I believe is a great spiritual power. Answers come. For example, I remember 3 occasions when I was on tour and I was so exhausted. I thought, I cannot give this lecture. You know, I'm sitting there in the green room, totally whacked. And so it's like, okay, open yourself up and say, you got me into this mess now, please help. And it's actually quite scary because on those 3 occasions, I was able to almost stand aside and see myself giving a lecture. And they were always very good lectures. But then I got scared and jumped back because, you know, if you get stuck and you're not really with yourself, it might be very embarrassing.
You've become a messenger of hope, you know, across the world. How does that feel, given from where your journey began and decades that you've spent fighting for the environment, fighting, you know, to free chimps from laboratory tests and, you know, succeeding, and the various battles that you've, you know, fought along the way in these decades that you've spent, you know, fighting for the environment, fighting for animals. You're really, how does it feel? You know, you are a messenger of hope for all of us right now.
How do I feel about it? I find it very strange that I've become this icon. And it wasn't my plan. It wasn't my intention. I was very, very shy. And at first, you know, when the press began asking questions, and the first time somebody came up and said, could they have an autograph? I wanted to hide away. I put sunglasses on, going through an airport, let my hair down. People still recognized me. And then I suddenly realized, well, I didn't ask for this to happen, but it's happened. So I must use it. So I took to taking around little environmentally sustainable brochures that vaguely said what we did, particularly Roots and Shoots, and said, you know, you need to get your children involved in this. And you could trace my travel, especially around the US, by where Roots and Shoots groups sprang up. It actually showed. So, you know, I still feel just like me who was a child here.
Well, we have a question about children, in fact, about what they can do. Sanjeev Prakash is asking, dear Dr. Goodall, is there an organization which young people can join to learn and act according to your thoughts and lessons? So if you could tell us a bit about your institute.
Well, it's for a young person, it's Roots and Shoots. And Shweta Hari, I'm never quite sure how you pronounce her name, but Shweta is the executive director. She was involved in Roots and Shoots when she was with her husband in Tanzania. And she was passionate to start it in India, which she did. She got registration from the government, which was very difficult. And Roots and Shoots is a program of the Jane Goodall Institute. So any young person listening or any parent, I presume you'll hand out the information, the website of Roots and Shoots, and get involved, because then you'll be with other young people who care like you do, and you can get your friends together. And, you know, even if you didn't register, we like you to register because then we can share what you do. But if you just get together with your friends and think about what you care about and wonder together what you can do about it. Maybe get some advice and then roll up your sleeves and get out there and do it.
And someone's asking for adults as well. Is that the same advice for the adults?
Same advice for the adults, yes. And, you know, adults, of course, get involved in slightly different ways, but we're now getting, I think we've got 3 big corporations who are involving their staff in roots and shoots, and the staff are involving their children in roots and shoots. So this, and those organizations are Salesforce and Apple and DocuSign.
Okay.
So hopefully other organizations will join in.
Organizations and schools. And coming back to something that we were talking about earlier, that post the pandemic, it's hit the economy in many countries. It's created more poverty. It's going to create more challenges on that front. And we really have to be very focused on that. We cannot allow in this process of bringing the economy back that we forget about environment and climate change and allow any sort of non-sustainable practices, etc. Isn't this something we all have to be very aware about right now and very vigilant about?
Yeah, business as usual. On a planet with finite natural resources and growing populations, it won't work. I gave the numbers earlier, and
yes.
If we get 10 billion of us on the planet and continue behaving as though nature's resources are infinite, which they're not, then it's going to be very, very grim for future generations. Indeed, we humans are not exempt from extinction. We're causing extinctions, and we could cause our own extinction if we're not careful. That's why it's important to get together now.
And to create this also for, Jen, we have lots of teachers and young children listening right now, and I'm seeing a lot of messages from them. They're also talking about how can all of us open up to the great spiritual power that you were talking about, that you feel. Is this something, how do we teach children about this? Is it through taking them to nature? If you could tell us a bit. A lot of teachers watching right now.
Well, I'm not sure. You see, my grandfather, who sadly I never met because he died before I was born, but he was a congregational minister of the big church here in Bournemouth. And so I grew up in a Christian family, but I had a wonderful mother, as I said. And she said to me, well, you were brought up in a Christian family, so you worship God, but you might have been born in Egypt, and then you'd be a Muslim probably, and you'd worship Allah. And so she went around all the different religions, and all the religions share the same golden rule: do to others as you would have them do to you. So that's not really what you're asking about, but it's my background. But the spiritual...
You talk about this in your book as well. You say every religion teaches us do unto others as you... I mean, that's the simple theme of every religion. That's something each religion teaches. And you talk about how you wish everybody could just focus on that.
Yes, and include animals in that. Don't do to animals what you would have them do to you. But, out in nature, it's when I just feel so attuned to the spiritual power. And I think young children definitely need to be in nature. And too many children today, especially in privileged societies, they're just spending all their time social media, iPads, iPhones, video games. I've seen children in the most beautiful place, and they're just walking along, looking at their cell phones, and it's tragic to me. And they've now proved scientifically that if you take a city and you've got areas of high crime, similar in 2 different places, and you make one of those areas green, put trees and flowers in all the empty spaces, crime rates drop, and people's physical and mental health gets better. So you have less medical bills, less problems like that. And there are, like in Japan, they invented forest bathing. And it doesn't mean you swim in the forest. It means you go out and you smell and you listen and you let the forest and the animals of the forest and the sounds into your soul. And that makes you aware that there's something out there. And you know, when people say, oh, but science will prove everything. I mean, we know how the universe was created. It was the Big Bang. Well, I'm sure it was the Big Bang, but that doesn't answer it, does it? Because what created the Big Bang? You can't say the Big Bang and nobody knows how the Big Bang originated. And if they say it was the confrontation of different particles, where did the particles come from? Like, you know, you cannot go back and find a beginning unless you have a creator. And what I love is that so many of the best thinkers, scientists and philosophers, have come to the conclusion there is indeed intelligence behind the universe.
Right, and just finally, I'd like to talk about how the foundation, the Khushwan Singh Foundation, has planted 100 trees in your name in the Sundarbans, and you know, hopefully it will be a little garden one day. And this is one of our most vulnerable ecosystems currently. It's also home to the tiger there. It's the only tigers that swim and eat fish in that environment, and it's something that's very fragile right now in this country.
Yes, well. We have a tree planting program, and it's planting and looking after trees. It's planting trees around forests to restore the forest and protecting existing old growth trees. That is so important because that's where all the biodiversity is. And if you protect that core of old growth, then as you plant trees around it, the ecosystem will spread gradually into those trees.
Well, thank you.
And I do.
Yes, do one.
I think it's very important to name the tigers, because once it has a name, it's an individual. And I don't know if you know this, but a story broke about 3 years ago. It was an American dentist, and he went out to Africa and the big game hunted. Remember, he killed Cecil. Well,
yes, Cecil the lion.
Around the world, but you know, Cecil had a name, and therefore everybody immediately said, "Oh, he's killed Cecil." But all the other lions and tigers that people shoot, they're all just as much of individuals. If they all had names, they'd be more precious and more valued.
That's very interesting, and I'll definitely take that question back to our forest department, who have this rule of not naming the tigers. But as I said, the communities around, the guides, the tourists, everybody does name them, and they all come with their little stories and lore. And I think, yes, that creates a lot more attraction. And the story of Cecil is absolutely right, and that's what created a lot of furor across the world when he was killed by the American. Thank you so much, Dr. Jane Goodall. It's an absolute pleasure. Again, it's an honor. I mean, I grew up reading about you, and it's absolutely wonderful to have had this conversation with you. And of course, the book, I hope a lot of children and teachers who are watching right now, and everybody needs to get their hands on the book, because it's really what we need right now. You know, we need hope.
There it is. And of course, this is only a draft copy, but the final one will have lots of photographs in it.
Wonderful. Everybody should get their hands on that. Right, Rachel?
Thank you so much for that wonderful, inspiring talk, which I think brought together so many of the themes of the event, that not only is no man, but mankind is not an island. I think, this will be inspirational for so many people. And, in India, where such great efforts have been made and are being carried out, I hope this inspires the younger generation to continue with those efforts. Thank you, Dame Jane Goodall. That was an absolutely wonderful event. And thank you, Gargi, too.
And thank you, and thank everybody who's been listening, and hope to find you all becoming members of JGI and Roots and Shoots, and helping us make the world a better place, because we need all of you.
Have we got Rahul there?
Yeah, well, I also want to add my word of thanks Dr. Jane Goodall, for taking your time off. I know that you have a very tight schedule, so we don't want to hold you back anymore. We just want to say again a big thank you for an invigorating, inspiring conversation. And we'll be in touch with your team and let you know how your 100 trees are doing. Bengal tigers have come by, when the Bengal tigers come by, to say thank you to them. Thank you, Dr. Jane Goodall. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Gargi, also. And now I want to say a word of thanks to all the people who've helped us and supported us. So this will just take only a few minutes, but it's very much an essential part of our Lit Fest. We are happy to announce the dates for the 10th edition of the Khushwan Singh Literary Festival this October, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. We have so many partners, speakers, and friends to thank for London today. First, this would not have been possible without support using public funding by the National Lottery through Arts Council England. We are deeply grateful for their support. Then NDTV, Prannoy Roy, Sonia Singh, and their wonderful team and anchors, two of whom we have just heard. Growtrees.com, thanks to Pradeep Shah, have planted trees for each speaker at KSLF, a tradition since inception 10 years ago in Kasauli. To date, we have done about 1,000 trees. As you know, this time they have planted a garden of 100 trees for Dr. Jane Goodall in the Sundarbans National Park. Another support we particularly want to mention is philanthropist Vikramjit Sani, President World Punjabi Organization, Chairman Sun Foundation, who has been with KSLF for many years. Not just with us, but he has also been extremely active in helping those in distress in North India during the current pandemic with oxygen. One of the, it was in great short supply in large parts of North India. And he has set up an oxygen making plant. He's provided oxygen. It's all been done in the great Sikh tradition of seva or service, like the langars that we have. So thank you, Vikramjit. Eastern Eye, our media partner in UK, most supportive always. Zarir Kama, Indraneil Singh, and Mayfair Hotels have been with us since the day we landed in London. This festival would never have happened without them. So they're an integral part of KSLF, as is then High Commissioner Navtej Sarna, who first invited us to London. We have many more partners who have supported us in different ways. Cambridge Society, Bombay, King's India Centre at King's College, London. My father, Khushwan Singh, actually graduated from King's College, London, where he did his law. Grays in London. Special thanks to Professor Satwinder Jas of King's College, London. Our patrons have been so supportive all throughout. Besides Zarir Kama, Navtej, Vikramjit, Baroness Tessa Blackstone, and Camellia Punjabi, all of whom are very old friends. Our advisory board too has many old friends, Imtiaz Dharkar, Sir Mark Tully, Purushottam Dheer. Two people who gave us confidence to go for London, Chan and Pushpinder Chaudhary, and tongues on fire. Our other supporters and friends, 1469, iconic brand, who have been with us since inception and have wonderful stores in North India and online with the name 1469. That happens to be the birth of Guru Nanak. Vita Biotics, Holiday Inn, Wedlick Bell, Mahi Mehra, Homayar Mehta, Barry Wetherill, and Lily Sani, Harki Singh. Our speakers and our hosts, Ejaz and Rachel. Rachel, who's here in front of us. Ejaz, who was there for the first day from Pakistan. They've come together across time zones to accommodate each other. And we're listening here thanks to an amazing team of volunteers backstage from all over the world, across countries and continents, from the UK, Malaysia, Pakistan, and India. KSLF is a volunteer-led festival since inception, and each one brings to it a session and drive and commitment that is unprecedented. Niloufar and I get all the credit, but Team KSLF deserve it all because they slog away behind the scenes. A big hand for our audience, from our audience for Team KSLF. Bharat for keeping spirits alive. Ashwani, our tech whiz behind the scenes, who's kept everybody together and pointed out whatever flaws there might be. Led by Rahul Gauba and his team. A social media team led by Kiran, Harinder, Una, Pooja, and our newest recruit, Bobby. Nikita, a volunteer from King's College, for guiding us. Ashima, a brainwave and English teacher who's been with us from the start 10 years ago. Our media people, Kishi Singh and Ajay Bharadwaj. Photographer, Ajay Bhatia. Serena for coming on board at the moment's notice despite her many work commitments. Many friends who are ready to help like Bittu Sehgal, Zarir Masani, Naman Ahuja, Amrita Jhaveri, Pradeep Kishan, Heta Pandit, who I noticed was listening to Dr. Jane Goodall's talk and who is, I hope she's still there. I'd like to thank her also. All invaluable for the success of this Lit Fest. Well, I've read you out a long list, but a well-deserved list. Without all those people, the Khushwan Singh Lit Fest would not have been able to survive for 10 long years and will continue, hopefully, physically. That's where we began in Kasauli, where my father did much of his writing. Well, thank you again for everything. And this brings us to the close of the Lit Fest. Unless there's anybody who wants to say something who's online at the moment, please do so.